Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IB DP educators that tackles your submitted questions and challenges by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of IB Unplugged. Today, we're talking with Rohit Vaswani. We're talking about the personal development plan in the IB. Anybody who's done the personal development plan or has it coming up, you know that it's a little bit daunting and intimidating and can sometimes feel like a tick box exercise. And so we're really excited to be talking with Rohit about how we can make that a lot better. Now, I actually had the chance of getting to meet Rohit a few years ago. I was leading a workshop on DP coordinators, and Rohit was there. He has been the DP coordinator at Oberoi International School in India, doing some great work there. And I'll tell you what, this guy just absolutely loves the IB mission, the philosophies, and the intentions here behind the PDP. And I think that's going to be evident here in this episode for you as well. And you're going to see some really insightful ways that we can make meaningful actions out of these PDPs instead of just tick boxes.
Exactly. So in this conversation, we're going to dive into a lot of the different experiences and ways that his schools have really been able to make meaningful change, get the students involved. And we're going to see some ideas where you can take the PDP from something that can be quite high up in like the leadership side and really make it something that feels like a full global school mission to drive change. So with that, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and let's bring out Rohit. Hi, Rohit. Welcome to IB Unplugged. We're so glad to have you today.
Hi, Courtney. Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me. I've watched a few episodes of IB Unplugged and really enjoyed the depth and authenticity of conversations you've created. And it's also refreshing to hear such honest reflections from the IB community. And I must say, you both make hosting look deceptively easy with being so amazing at it. And I hope I can keep up with that level of conversation today.
Oh, it's very kind of you. Yeah.
Very kind. And I'm sure you will.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. And one of our first questions here, Rohit, we want to let everybody get to know you a little bit more. Why education?
Well, for me, education has always felt less like a career choice and more like a calling that revealed itself over time. Interestingly, I didn't start in education, one of those educators that started in some other stream. I explored technology for a bit and did consulting, and those experiences were very valuable. They taught me structure, systems thinking, and efficiency. But somewhere in the journey, I realized that while those roles engage my mind, they didn't quite, engage my heart, so to say. Mm-hmm. And I found myself constantly drawn back to the classroom. So, I feel like there's something about the moment when a student gets it, or, when they start questioning you back, or when they start surprising themselves, that the energy is kind of addictive. So I feel like there's something incredibly powerful about being part of someone's professional and intellectual growth. Mm-hmm. You're not just delivering content, but you're like shaping how someone sees themselves. And I, for one, was deeply influenced by one of my teachers growing up. Yeah. Not because of what they taught, but because of how they made me feel about learning. Yeah. They made me believe that I was capable of a lot more than I actually thought I was. And I realized very early on that whether you love or hate a subject has very little to do with the subject itself and everything to do with the person teaching it. So I think somewhere deep down, I wanted to be for someone what that teacher was for me. So if I had to answer simply why education, because it's that one space where you can influence both minds and futures. I think it's also one of those beautiful professions that carries heart and purpose. Mm-hmm. And I genuinely feel very fortunate to wake up every day and to get to do something that I actually care about.
Beautiful answer.
Yeah, that's a gorgeous answer.
Yeah. Great. Well, today we're going to kind of dive into the PDP and kind of your experiences around that. And so I thought that we could start by just asking what your initial reaction was to the PDP when it was first introduced.
I think the original intention behind PDPs in general, and as I understand it, was to make that professional growth a lot more intentional rather than incidental. Like in schools, we are constantly doing something or the other. We're constantly reflecting, attending workshops, trying new things. I sometimes feel it's almost like an initiative overload of sorts.
Yeah.
But PDPs were meant to pause that cycle and ask, what are we deliberately getting better at? And more importantly, why? It was meant to connect that growth directly to what students need, and by virtue of it, what the program requires. So I guess it was about alignment between individual growth, student needs, departmental priorities, and the broader IB standards. So I think the idea behind the PDP was to bring in that development by not making it so random, but very purposeful and intentional.
That's great. Yeah. And I guess, after a year of doing the personal development plan, or maybe in your first year of doing the personal development plan, what's one word you would use to describe your experience with that?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question. And if I'm reflecting my journey through this, I think if there was one word that I would want to describe for it, maybe recalibrating would be that word. I mean, because if I think translating the intention into practice wasn't really automatic, it required us to adjust expectations on multiple levels, like what meaningful goal setting looks like, or how ambitious yet realistic targets should be, and how much structure versus flexibility was needed. So we really needed to kind of align the original intent of PDPs as development tools with the realities of its implementation, because let's face it, it's always a busy school year.
Right.
So I think setting that right tone where PDPs felt kind of growth oriented rather than evaluative, reflective rather than procedural. I think that was the kind of recalibration that I felt was something that helped.
I'm sure anybody who's listening from the IB is very glad you didn't just say tedious or anything like this. Yeah. Well, let's dive into that here in our first segment. We really want to get into understanding, what is the personal development plan supposed to be? What's its intention? Why are we kind of aiming for it? So what's the original intention behind the PDP in the IB Diploma Program?
Pretty much similar. I think, like I said, the whole idea with which the IB came up with the PDP was to look at growth and look at where the school wants to be, and where they currently are, and more importantly, how they want to achieve that. So while there can be a couple of multiple things happening that you really want to continue to build and grow, look at this one focus area where you will be a lot more intentional, a lot more committed, and evolve through it. So it's a process, and IB is really clear about it. It's an evolution of where you think you started from and where you want to be. And in the journey, if that's something that's taking you somewhere and it's taking a little bit of time and it requires you to think a lot more about things that you initially did not, then be it. So I think the intention behind the PDP is purely to be a lot more reflective and more so focused and committed reflection into where you want to go and where you want to be.
How does it connect to kind of the core elements of the IB, like with the ATL skills, with well-being, kind of all the different elements? How does it pull those in? I'm
actually very glad you asked this, Courtney, because when we think about ATLs or, talk about core or talk about, your TOK, well-being, CAS, we think of it that they sit in the student world. And when we look at PDPs, it's something that teachers do. It's always that kind of a thought process that comes across. But I think the answer to what you just asked is rooted somewhere in system design and thinking. Because PDPs essentially shape the way in which you design your lesson experiences. So when teachers are intentional in their practice, that directly impacts how they nurture those ATL skills. So, for example, if a teacher's PDP focuses on improving feedback or inquiry design, then that organically strengthens, say, self-management or reflection or thinking skills, which are core ATL competencies. And I think even an interesting element you brought about is about well-being. while there may not be an explicit connection, but a very strong connection to the PDPs. Like when professional growth is structured, purposeful, and not reactive in a sense, it kind of reduces that uncertainty and builds teacher confidence. So if teachers are clear, it directly affects or impacts the kind of classroom climate that they have around them. And that means students experience more consistency, clearer expectations, stronger support. And I think that all contributes to the way in which it affects well-being. Very, very important element. And I'm very passionate about the core bit that the diploma builds into its own in the whole system design and the program design. I think PDP's core is where the PDP actually becomes a lot more visible. The core demands scaffolding of reflection, like academic honesty, independent research, and a very strong element of agency. So, and I vividly remember this. So our PDP was essentially around assessments. We talked about using a variety of tools and strategies to build assessment capable learners. Essentially stemmed from a strategic intent on assessment. And I remember in one of the data points that we collected, students didn't score us very high on co-constructing assessment criteria. And when we started to look at the lens of, in MYP, it's a framework. You have your TSCs. You can co-build it. But when we talked about DP, we realized that these are rubrics sent by the IB. Like, how are we co-constructing it? What do we do? So that kind of prompted reflection. And then we sort of piloted with TOK. And we said, maybe let's unpack very explicitly the rubric that IB has shared. So, for example, in your TOK essay, clarifying what focused versus sustained connection to title meant, what effective linking to areas of knowledge look like compared to superficial linking. So we made those sample responses a lot more visible. So we broke these and dissected these terms further down that probably might seem a little bit more open to interpretation. So that's when we realized that co-construction might also look like giving a lot more detailed and structure to what IB has already shared. And it was so interesting that we saw a clearer understanding of high quality work from students. And that tied in with our PDP focus of assessment capability and assessment capable learners. And I think they started speaking the language of criteria. I did hear a lot of students really referencing that rubric and criteria that IB laid out. So it was not just about performance, but understanding. So to answer your question, how does it affect ATL, well-being, core? I think it is teachers that shape classroom design, and classroom design shapes ATL or well-being or core. So I think connection may not be direct, but it is pretty systemic in its sense. So I think it really impacts and makes a big difference to what we're doing with the program.
I have a clarifying question that might be really basic, but I'm asking it anyway because I don't think I can get through without. The PDP, I think I was thinking of it more on a teacher by teacher level, but from what you're saying, it's almost like the school has one PDP, but each teacher looks at how their performance can be improved, like what they need to do as individuals, but there's one unified PDP. Is that how you guys have approached it?
Correct. So there are multiple approaches, honestly. A school can have a separate program looking at a separate PDP focus. Say, for example, PYP has something related to their teaching and learning practices. MYP may be different, DP may be different. But what we had was we had a very clear direction from our leadership team that we're looking at building one PDP focus for all the three programs. In fact, we run 2 campuses, so it was all 6 programs across campuses. We were already doing a lot of work around assessment, and that was that was a strategic intent. So we said, let's build on areas that we haven't touched upon. So it was very clear as a mandate that we want to have a single PDP focus throughout the 3 programs, so that everyone speaks the same language. There's a shared narrative. The ecosystem that we build around is focused on assessment capability, use variety of tools and strategies. So it became a lot more focused, and it also became like one purpose for everybody in the building. So it sort of put people together and brought that community coherence also, in a sense.
Okay.
What I love about what you're saying here so far, Rohit, is it's very clear that we're using this for deep reflection. We're using this for, essentially reevaluating what's going on in our schools. And you can see how what you've just discussed, you can integrate this very well into the specific academic planning. You can involve students in co-construction of process, assessment criteria, this sort of thing. So I think one of the biggest things that you've immediately sort of torn torn the sticker off, I guess, is just, this isn't necessarily like, let's just tick some boxes and make sure everything's going there. It's a matter of like a deep reflective process that allows the school to really improve. And I guess, would you say that's the biggest gap between the IB's intention and how PDPs are often used in schools? Or from your perspective, what's kind of the biggest gap there?
Absolutely, John. I think you've totally got the point absolutely across. I think one of the biggest gaps or challenges is like PDPs are intended to be development tools, but more often than not, they end up being those compliance tools. Like you rightly said, the tick box that you want to make. And if I'm being honest, during evaluation cycles, when everyone is juggling a lot of things, it can seem overwhelming. And it can seem easy or convenient for schools to probably put a PDP focus of something that they're really good at, because they want to make it like putting it out there and tick that box and get done with it, because there's so much happening.
Almost see it as an interruption to what they're normally doing at school, right?
And I think that's when the PDPs risk becoming cosmetic rather than catalytic in their intention. Like you said, it's about deep reflection. It's about truly thinking where you are. And we were very clear in our understanding, or rather our leadership team, we had clear mandate that we want to make it as authentic as it is. And that said, IB is also looking at it as with a lens of appreciative inquiry. It's okay even if you've put down a PDP and you've not met it in the desired time. You've started the process. You've committed to something and you've reached somewhere where you probably weren't, if not the end goal at that particular point, but you've actually started to reflect on it. So I think it's very, very important that PDP should create a space for stretch, for identifying that real growth area. And even if it is uncomfortable, I would say that if you're picking those areas that don't seem very comfortable or convenient, you're being authentic. And that's where the real development will actually lie. And it's interesting because if I think of it, another challenge or gap that I realize now that comes through my mind is also alignment. More often than not, PDPs are powerful only when those individual growth ladders are put together in program priorities. So if there isn't structured dialogue connecting those goals, they kind of become isolated, everyone improving in different directions rather than building like a collective capacity.
Right.
So I think what Courtney just asked some time back, we had a clear understanding that we are doing all 3 programs together. Everyone looks at one focus. I think that tone setting is really important. It needs to look growth oriented. It needs to look not evaluative of sort. And it's kind of that culture. And I think once you start building that through from the very beginning, I think PDP just seems very organic, and it's not like I have to do this, then I have to do this. Oh my God, I have to make evidences out of this, and I have to throw this in the document, and all the jazz.
It really highlights for me also the importance of good strategic leadership and because as you mentioned, it's not everybody going in their own directions. And I don't think people do that in a way to be difficult. They notice in their own reflective practice, like, oh, here's something I want to work on. Here's something I want to work on. And through all the best intentions, you can kind of see the school going in many different ways. Yeah. And then student experience, or if you're at like a coordinator level experience, is suddenly like, whoa, everybody, what are we doing? Let's get kind of one road here. So, just as you're saying here, you can see where one sort of strategic vision on what's going to happen here and clearly communicating that can be a really powerful thing for everybody at the school.
Yeah, I guess it also helps with leadership, thinking about like, if you have a group of people and everyone's trying to improve in different directions, every single experience is siloed out, where if everybody's trying to improve in the same way, then leadership can also invest more heavily in their own ability to support all of the teachers and putting people together. What are you doing? Being able to learn from each other. So I agree that unified growth, even if maybe some teachers are like, this is the one thing I do think I am doing well. Like there can be experiences like that, but then I guess that gives them the opportunity to work with the other teachers and build that community of growth that you're talking about.
All right. Well, we've kind of clarified the intentions of the PDP and what we should be aiming for as a school. Let's get into kind of our second segment here, what's working in practice and what doesn't work in practice. And I wonder if, you kind of shared one example of that co-construction of criteria for like assessment criteria. What are some examples from your school where that PDP has led to some really meaningful student engagement?
Oh, well, there were quite a few. I think one of the most visible shifts that I saw was actually in the overall learning experience. PDP conversations began influencing assessment design a lot more intentionally. So there was a conscious movement towards more continuous assessment, a wider range of assessment methods. So instead of, especially in DP, relying heavily on high-stake moments in exams, students got multiple opportunities to demonstrate their understanding across different formats, say written responses, oral discussions, or reflective components, or application tasks. And that tied in with the idea of our PDP that we wanted to use different strategies and different variety of tools to build that assessment capability. So I'm not saying that it took away from the rigor that DP is normally associated with, but it kind of deepened that conceptual understanding because students engage with the similar ideas but with a different lens. Mm-hmm. So they were kind of being assessed for for maybe a particular aspect using one way in written response and maybe the other way in reflective understanding, or probably breaking down a rubric, or probably looking at a sample response. So there was continuous assessment of sorts. It may not be like formally documented on your learning management systems, but there was learning. Yeah. There was that conceptual understanding that was getting deepened. Mm-hmm. The other shift that I saw was in the feedback culture. Very, very important element when we talk about assessments. Because the PDP goals also talked about improving feedback practices, because we wanted assessments to look a lot more meaningful and that takeaway to happen for students. So it didn't just say, oh, this is a 5. It shifted from, here's what your analysis is, here's what you're doing well, here's what's limiting it. And it didn't directly come from teachers. And there were times where teachers may have said, okay, this is a this band response. We literally had students come to them, okay, why do you think so? And they started referencing the band descriptors. I remember this very vividly in one of the language and literature assessments. Students literally came back and told me, okay, what about this is telling you I'm a 5? So students started engaging a lot more. So there was a movement from judgment to guidance. I mean, that classroom tone changed. Students felt a lot more supported. And they didn't feel like they were being evaluated all the time. They didn't feel like it was about grades, of course, but they didn't feel like we're writing an assessment for marks or grades. So I think that their willingness to revise and take those academic risks sort of, improved, and how. So we really saw that. I think one of the most powerful outcome that I remember as I speak is students started demonstrating stronger ownership of learning. And that's when we said this is assessment capability. We want them to be a lot more accountable, a lot more responsible for where they're heading to in whatever thing. If they're okay, we made them do a pentagon activity where we mapped them across their HL subjects, SL subjects, core points, basically, if you are at level 5, it would give you a perfect pentagon. And when we did that activity, interestingly, we found out almost more than half of the cohort said that we are not doing good at our SL subjects. So they're now thinking that are we investing a little too much time for our HLs? Because at the end, it's going to build together and give us those 45, including those SL subjects. So students really started actively seeking feedback. They started referencing criteria language. They started engaging more meaningfully in self-reflection. This Pentagon activity served as a beautiful self-reflection tool. It really came to a point where this engagement shift didn't look very dramatic. Like it wasn't as a one point, I say, aha moment of sorts. Like it was cumulative. Students really started to began to understand the mechanics of assessment, and we would see those, in observable ways, if not tangible ways, all the time. We could see how they were really responding to the feedback or responding to their own learning journey. And we felt quite happy because we're looking at these kids going to university in 2 years' time and leading an absolutely independent life. And if they're taking ownership of their learning right now, we feel really happy that these skills are automatically built in for their university readiness.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, often you'll have students come in and kind of argue a grade, right? They're like, no, here's where it is. This is the rubric. You misevaluated me. As I was listening to you, I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. They've got some ownership of it. They want to develop it. But then kind of the devil's advocate in my head was like, were they just arguing for a grade?
I'm going to be honest. We did have a couple of those instances as well. But I think what we really need to do is move them from that zone of denial where they're coming from the lens of, I'm referencing this rubric or this criteria because I want my marks increased, to the lens that, this is what it is and this is where you've gone wrong, or this is where you probably can improve through. Yes, I can walk you through where you've gone wrong, but you have to understand that without you not accepting the fact that this is more like a transformational journey of sorts. So again, it came about one of the elements of assessment capability. You've got to be mature enough to understand where you currently are and not just come across saying that, I got this grade, I think I deserve more, and here's the reason, tell me now,
Yeah. Well, and you can see how including them in the scaffolding process of creating that assessment criteria then makes it a lot better, because the number of times I've had a student maybe argue for a particular mark by referencing a criteria or something like this, and then we have to we drill it down. I'm like, well, what does that word mean? And they can't quite explain. I'm like, well, I think that's probably the issue here. You think this means this, but not that. And so, including them, as you say, at the start of that, and as they kind of build it together, helps them have a lot more ownership and buy-in to recognize, this is what I'm performing too, right?
Yeah, I think, John, even as IB educators, having taught, I still remember one of my IA criteria says sophistication and rigor in math. Okay, so now these are terms which can cover a plethora of things, really. And as IB educators, even if we marked zillions of IAs and done this, we still feel like, okay, do we want to give this another lens? Do we want someone to just moderate it and see it through? And these are kids who are doing the diploma for the first time. So it's important that it's also okay for them to feel that they should deserve better grades, because maybe that there's a gray area of understanding between those terms, and we as educators still bracket us in that box. I think it's only fair for kids to ask. So I think it was perfectly fine for kids to come in and check in on those lines, but it was also very equally important for them to mature up in terms of understanding that, hey, this really is the case. And if we are looking at it from a lens of improving and looking at a lens from how we can bring in guided support, then this is great.
Are you an IB educator wanting to improve your practice and needing just a bit more support getting there? Ever wanted to learn more about a specific aspect of the diploma program, or just ask a question to an educational theorist about a specific IB aspect? IB Unplugged is the place for you. Simply visit cognity.com/IB Unplugged to submit your question to us and have your question explored in more detail in an upcoming episode. And now, back to the show.
I think this is really great, but I'm wondering also, I think John had one example of like, at what point is it just students feeling more empowered to argue their grade, but not necessarily it shifting the conversation. But what other challenges were coming up early on?
I think there were quite a few because we were enthusiastic in general and clear about our direction and genuinely convinced about the value of building that assessment capability. But when you're that convinced, there is this natural temptation to kind of assume that everyone is on the same page, kind of assume that everyone understands this the way that you understand. So I think starting early on, we were really, really empowered and we wanted to make a big difference. And I think the biggest initial takeaway or challenges was also the pace. We, like how I said for TOK, how they unpack the co-construction or assessment criteria, and we saw visible improvement. But what works in TOK doesn't essentially translate very directly and almost at that speed to say a mathematics or say sciences without thoughtful adaptation. So I think each discipline needed that space to reinterpret the idea through their own lens. So give them that space, give them that time to sort of those ideas to sink in, for them to build that whole ecosystem around it. I think that was one of my takeaway in terms of when we identified one of the first few challenges. We're also a very big school. So with a big school comes its own challenges of consistencies. So even when teachers agreed with the direction, their interpretation of implementation was varied. Like some departments moved quickly, they experimented a lot more confidently, while others needed a little bit more scaffolding, little bit more reassurance. And that reminded us that improvement really isn't linear. It's not uniform. People are going to take their time. So that consistency also needs to be monitored in a certain sense, that it should not be that it is pretty much in a particular section or a particular department and not essentially trickling down to the others.
Yeah,
that was also one of the initial challenges, and I'm thinking it through. I think if I've learned anything from that phase is that build that space for dialogue, allow departments to contextualize and keep returning to evidence. A PDP doesn't live in a document, really. It lives in conversations and it lives in the fact that you have conversations and reflective dialogue around it and continue doing that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that in my work, I'm really interested in change management, and there's so many different ways around it, and everybody's got a different model for it. But things that I think always come back in the really human parts of change management is like, you're not going to change if you don't want to. I think that's one really big one. So like having that buy-in, I think is really hard, especially like you said, you're doing this not just, okay, our DP science cohort is going to work on this. It's like, no, everybody across 2 campuses, 3 MYP, PYP, DP, it's massive to get that much buy-in from that many different stakeholders. And that's such a key part of it. I mean, how did you get everyone to buy in to the extent that you can see meaningful change?
I think we invested a lot in mentor training. We really brought in everyone together in the process. So it wasn't just 6 IB program coordinators across campuses formulating the PDP. We asked teachers, we came up with an idea, we talked to them about it. We talked to parents, we talked to students about it. What do you feel? What do you think about it? The minute you ask them those questions, you kind of transfer that ownership or accountability. And that directly brings in that buy-in of sorts. We invest a lot in mentor training. It really plays a very, very big role. These mentor conversations varied widely, not because people weren't committed, but because each person brought their own style, comfort level, interpretation of what a good PDP dialogue looked like. So there were some mentors who learned more instructional, but there were some who learned a lot more reflective. And that's when we realized that we needed to share protocols. Like we needed to, so we moved from broad messaging to modeling. So rather than say, increase co-construction, we shared concrete classroom examples. We curated practices across departments. We created shared platforms to showcase them and made that peer learning visible. So, and I must say that there were uncertainties at time, but some mentors were unsure about how challenging it should be, or others wondered how far they could push that alignment with school priorities and by honoring everyone's individual interests of sort. But I think it's also equally important to normalize these uncertainties, for them to feel that it's okay to feel the way that you feel. So automatically that buy-in element, when you you feel supported, you feel like it's okay if it's not happening, let's talk about it, let's see it. So that psychology play in terms of that narrative brings in that additional level of buy-in. So I think when that started to happen, mentors began sharing what worked, what didn't, and also consistency improved. Not because we scripted those conversations, but because we built that kind of shared understanding. So I think for buy-in, very, very important for us all as educators to come together to invest a lot in mentor training. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these implementation of the PDP is essentially the teachers in classrooms. So they really need to know beyond the intent. While yes, a lot of them had really good intentions, but intent often does not translate into implementation or impact for that matter. So trying to make them see through that this is how you could possibly look at, maybe this is what works for a math department. Does it work for you as science departments? Maybe yes, maybe not. How do you want to tweak it? And go for it. Like, it's okay if you try it and it doesn't work, but let's just try it of sorts. So that kind of brought in that buy-in and that understanding and that coherence together.
What I love about what you just described here, Rohit, is it sounds like it was a community engagement, a real like, let's get everybody involved in this. And I kept hearing in my head that sort of like mantra of like high expectations, low threat. And it sounded like it was clear that what we were doing with this PDP was a process of reflection and trying to improve our practices and make ourselves better, but not through the lens of like, whatever we're doing wrong, let's undo that, correct that, or you have to get out. It seems like there was very low threat, but just let's buy into these high expectations together, which I think is great.
Yeah.
And, what you outlined there in terms of the mentor role and the conversations that are taking place there and that sort of shared protocol and consistency, I think you can see how that would make that work a lot better. And I hope anybody who's listening right now is hearing like, okay, I don't necessarily just have to throw the criteria in front of everybody at my school and say, right, let's go through this. Are we doing that? Are we doing that? But rather, get everybody involved in it. And at the same time, then I'm wondering, on the DPE, especially, there are natural sort of pinch points or heavier moments. Like I know you got mock exams that are kind of going on now, or you might have end of year exams in DP year one, or like, major deadlines, EE drafts, that sort of stuff.
Yes.
In those moments where it's easy for, I think, students and for that matter, teachers to be a little bit more performative, right? Just focused on what's the grade, let's get the right grade, that sort of thing. How were those conversations around your personal development plan affected when, for lack of a better term, it kind of like, all right, but this is going to hit the road now. This is all sort of fun philosophy and we're getting better, but right now it's my future. How did those conversations shift?
I think what you said is so true, John. But I feel like anchoring those PDP conversations to key milestones, like you just said, the mock exams or e-submissions, felt a lot more real. It shifted from it feeling abstract or philosophical, like you said. So when PDP discussions were happening in isolation, say at the beginning of the year, it sometimes felt conceptual. But when we tied to these moments of evidence, the quality of reflections improved. So, for example, after mock exams, instead of just analyzing a student performance data, or, if that was the focus, or if one of the goals was around improving feedback, formative feedback, or scaffolding extended responses, those mock scripts became those tangible evidence. So in a way, it told us what worked, where are the students still struggling.
Yeah.
That intent of us building this strategy, like we said, varied tools and strategies. We did these strategies. Did it really work? Did it not? What does it tell me about this instructional approach? So it gave that data point, and whenever that data bit comes in, there is automatically more buy-in of sorts, because you're linking that concept to evidence. Even around drafts, like PDP goals related to, let's a favorite one, talk about co-construction of criteria. Like when we talked about EE drafts, teachers could reflect on how effectively students were responding to that guidance, because we unpacked those criteria, we dissected them, and we wanted to know how independent they were becoming, and whether that scaffolding was actually working in a sense or not. So at those intentional checkpoints, say in an EE drafts, we found those drafts were a lot more richer, because before we would give feedback, kids were sort of scanning it through the lens of the rubrics, because now they were aware of, say, what example a sophisticated or rigor would probably mean, or a sustained reference or a superficial reference to the title means on those lines. So I think when we tied in our PDP with these intentional milestones, what changed was the shift from hypothetical growth to, say, evidence informed growth. And it kind of acted as a mirror, like it moved PDP conversations from, I think this is improving, to, okay, here's what the data is telling me, here's what this milestone is telling me. And like I said, with data, we also saw that it reduced defensiveness. So when reflections are anchored in shared evidence rather than personal perception, the dialogue becomes more professional and relatively less personal.
Yeah.
So I think those the milestones gave PDPs that texture, that connected that concept to an underlying evidence.
I think that's such an important part that I don't think is necessarily emphasized enough in teacher professional development, of like actually meeting them where they're at in these real moments, and accepting that they are people like who have specific needs at specific times. Like the PDP is one of a lot of things that they're worrying about and thinking about at that time. And we're so good, and educators are so good at differentiating for their students and thinking about, how do I reach my students where they're at, and how do I tailor this concept or this course material to what they are interested in, what they are experiencing in that moment. But then the second that it goes to teacher learning, it's all of that's out the window, and it's like, no, we're going to do things in this completely different way than we all know best practice of teaching is. So I think that is a huge part. It's like, it's going to sink in better. You're going to get more buy-in if you aren't making the PDP this extra disconnected development, but it's genuinely saying, like, what are you working on right now? What's stressing you out right now? Let's build solutions for your problems now, which are very different in February than they are in May or start of school in August, September. So I think that that's a really important part of it.
So you can see where you've got this dynamic that's going to shift throughout the year. You're going to have sort of pinch points or heavier moments, that sort of thing. Now, with my university and careers guidance counselor hat on, as well as DP coordinator, there are specific moments where you have like predicted grades. And I'm quite interested in what ways did PDP, as in personal development plan reflections, end up feeding into predicted grades as well?
That's such an interesting, very DP coordinator and university guidance counselor question. But, and you know more than I do, when the moment you hear predicted grades, ears sharpened like a cat hearing a can opener. Suddenly, everyone in the room has perfect posture. It's almost like a trigger of sorts,
For students and teachers.
Students and teachers, exactly. And that was so interesting because when we were thinking about PDP and we were looking at it in terms of predicted grade, we sort of looked at it from two angles, one at the student lens and the other at teachers' lens. Of course, from the side of teachers, if we say strengthening rubric clarity was the PDP focus, that often translated into clearer articulation of where student was in their learning journey. So while we had these multiple data points from their assessments, predicted grades wasn't just about that data. They were supported by this insight, which was into the patterns, into consistency of their draft improvement, responsiveness to feedback, independent skill development. So that way, PDP reflections were specific, tied more to a more comprehensive evidence. So that gave us a stronger professional language around predicted grades. And from the students' end, when we started talking about PGs, we realized that PGs is predicted grades. We realized that predicted grades often feel like something that happens to student, or at least that's what they think, that it happens to us. We got this grade. So we said, let's flip it. We said we actually had students step into the role of teachers. So we used sample data. We gave them grade boundaries. We gave them IB grade descriptors. We said, okay, now analyze your own performance and give yourself a predicted grade.
And then everybody was predicted at 42 plus.
So, I mean, that did happen. I mean, we talk about assessment capability. And so here we are. And we said that, okay, go ahead and give yourself a predicted grade, but we want a clear rationale.
Mm-hmm.
And before we did that, we unpacked how teachers often give predicted grades. We talked to them about grade boundaries. We talked to them about IB grade descriptors. What was fascinating was the depth of reasoning we saw. Like they poured their hearts out like there is no tomorrow. We had 1 page of reasonings that they have. I must be a 7. I must be a 6. But it wasn't really about the number. They were honestly now referencing paper component weightages, skill demonstrations, specific link to descriptors, the consistency of criteria performance across paper components. So what had happened was it aligned beautifully with our assessment capability, not just about knowing their grade, but them understanding how it is constructed. And then came the more powerful part, which John, you highlighted. What if the student is saying, I'm a 45, but the teacher is saying, well, I think let's get your expectations a little clearer.
I think what you meant was 35. There's a bit of a difference there.
So I think what came after that was the most powerful part, in my opinion. So if that predicted grade, what student put down and what the teacher has given based on their professional judgment saw a significant gap, we didn't treat it like a correction. We had very intentional, supportive conversation with the students, saying that you've said this, but I want you to really reflect. And we sort of asked those prompts and questions that here's what you're thinking, here's your evidence, and what do we need to work together to build you from what your expectation is to what your teacher has put down right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of linkage really was transformational. So, when we had those conversations, we got to know so much about students, understanding where they are at, and very importantly, it set expectations. It not only set those emotional expectations at those emotional level, but also expectations at a level where they now started internalizing, maybe I may have not thought about it objectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there were some heated discussions, if I may add, in the bargain. But they're kids and they're teenagers, they're just wanting to get into the universities that they want.
Sure.
So it's okay if there were at times those disagreements. But at the end of the day, I think we somewhere managed to make those expectations clearer and help them understand what they could probably do to have that goal that they have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very supportive and reflective.
Yeah, I can tell that it would have been that. And appreciate what you mentioned earlier, where, it's absolutely valid for somebody to want to try to aim for the best they can and deeply understand what is going on there. And if they don't understand the difference between how they're performing realistically and how somebody else is, checking into that, as teachers, we probably shouldn't just shut it down right away as, oh, here comes another kid arguing for a grade, but rather like there's a valid intention here that I can take a teachable moment from, and I can, help them grow a little bit. And it sounds like using the framework of the PDP in some of those conversations, as you had already outlined with like your mentors and creating that sort of whole scaffolded approach, sounds like that created a good way to have that conversation take place.
It really was. I think we really felt like we were touching that nerve of assessment capability for them, taking a lot more ownership about their own learning. So it was really nice to see that. Yeah.
Rohit, thank you so much for this. I think we've got a lot of really good ideas of how you've taken something that could be quite abstract, like the PDP, into really tangible experiences with the students. And I also like that you did involve the students a lot in this. It wasn't just the teachers on the side. It seems like it's been a great program for you that you've learned a lot from throughout the process. And yeah, I just want to thank you for taking the time to share those experiences with everyone.
Great. Thanks so much, Rohit. We really appreciate getting the chance to chat with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. And I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope it sounded engaging and not just me enthusiastically unpacking ideas at length. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, John and Courtney.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.